Hello, and welcome to Placebo, the podcast where my brother and I take turns teaching each other something new about healthcare or medicine. I'm Kaylin Richards, and this is my brother.
And I'm Logan Richards.
All right, and this is our first episode. We're recording not in each other's presence, so it feels
we're
a
not
little...
staring at each other.
Not...
Well, I'm still staring at you.
I can't see you, though. So
I'm in London right now, and we're talking over the interhighway.
So we'll see. We hope this recording does okay. It might not sound exactly like our normal recordings do.
So bear with us.
Yeah. Okay. So today, brother, I have a topic which I was asked about by our mother.
Do that.
No. So the topic is cell phones, and specifically our cell phones possibly causing cancer or other health issues. We're gonna focus mostly on cancer because that's where there's so much research about cell phones, but that's mostly the research that I looked at for this.
Once you said cell phones, I knew right what you were going to talk about.
Of course. So our mother, has concerns about do cell phones cause cancer, and she wanted to know more. Is that supported by research or is it not? And I think that maybe it's something that a lot of people have heard about in the general media, or just people saying, you should talk on your speakerphone and not on your holding the phone up next to your head. You shouldn't, sleep with it next to your head all the time, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I've only heard it 2 places ever in my life. One of them is from our mother, like 100 times.
Uh-huh.
The other actually is from a teacher of mine at school that kind of mentioned it off the cuff, but he was saying, he was thinking there was going to be this increase in cancer because of cell phones.
Sure.
And no one really asked about it because it was just kind of a random first, sentence. But those are the only 2 times I've ever heard about this issue.
Well, I've heard about it from our mother for sure, but also a lot mentioned from patients who feel that their cancer has been caused by cell phones, or others, people that I work with who feel like that cancers might be caused by cell phones. So I think it's not just our mom, but maybe that's where we've heard it the most.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested to find out how it works.
Yeah, because I think I have heard a lot of people say things like that cell phones might be dangerous, but I haven't seen a lot of people change their behaviors. I see most people carry their phones in their pocket all the time, or sleep with them plugged in right by their head, or, they're always touching them, basically.
I think this is kind of a trend in technology because it develops so quickly, especially the technology that's not meant for healthcare. We just kind of put it out on the market and don't even think about the health consequences.
Right. Doing this research, I started to think about, I wonder if my laptop, which I am sitting with, on my lap for hours as I'm doing all this research, is this bad too? Should I be concerned about damage to, my body from the laptop? I don't know.
All sorts of those things that I think, to my knowledge, are not heavily tested in terms of how they affect human health because people want to use them. So and people can sell them.
I think they're not heavily tested prior to being out on the market, but I think there has been a lot of research about cell phones now. So let's get into that.
Okay, good.
Okay. So, do we need to be concerned or not? I want to kind of start looking at what the thing that people are concerned about potentially causing damage with cell phones, and that's electromagnetic radiation.
Okay.
Okay, that's the proposed reason that they think it would cause cancer is because of this electromagnetic radiation. And that, radiation is on a spectrum, right? It's around us all the time. There's radio waves and microwaves, and visible light is part of that. X-rays, UV rays.
Radiation from the sun, right?
Right. So there's radiation all around us all the time. And it is known that some types of radiation do cause damage that can include cancer, like you mentioned the sun. People can get, skin cancer from being in the sun too much.
That's an obvious example.
X-rays are on there, and it's known that if people are exposed to too much of that can cause damage in the cells. That can cause cancer as well. Mm-hmm. Right. So it is known that some types of radiation on the spectrum do cause damage to humans, but is the kind of radiation that is put out by cell phones damaging or not? That's kind of the question.
Okay, so do you know, are you going to talk about why are cell phones putting out radiation in the first place?
Oh, I don't know, because I didn't look at how they actually work. I mean, that's how they work. That's how they communicate with satellites and cell phone towers, and right, brother?
Right. Well, I'm expecting they're using some type of I mean, I don't know exactly how they work either, but as you mentioned before, a lot of our communication is done through like radio waves and other frequencies of wave, and so it's likely that that's how they're communicating with satellites, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know if does it result in like this concentrated area of radiation because of their sending or receiving these signals, or?
Yeah, this is the thing that is tricky because a lot of the studies that we'll talk about started maybe 10 years ago or so to kind of get a longitudinal, like, how does cell phones affect people over time? But the type of cell phones people were using 10 years ago and how they were using them is really different from how people use them today, right?
This is like exactly what I'm saying. All these devices change so quickly. How are we going to know what their effects are?
So when people just had phones that they were making calls on and maybe texting, that was really different from the type of usage. And I think the type of radiation the phone puts out to someone that's surfing on the internet or downloading podcasts or, that sort of thing is different. So I want to first talk about. Go ahead.
Sounds like we'll focus not so much on how the phone makes the radiation, but just that we know that it's there.
Yeah.
And that different phones have different levels of radiation that they either put out or.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing.
Like that.
That's the thing. There are so many different types of phones. There are the different types of phones, and depending on what you're doing on your phone, different amounts of radiation will go out. So, first,
are we going to focus more on the health benefits and try and just forget about all the differences that all the various phones cause?
Yeah, there are a few specific studies, and I want to start with one that I think is pretty well known that came out. Oh, when was it published? A few years ago, 2010. And it's called the Interphone Study. Have you heard of that?
No.
So
I don't know any phones by that name.
Okay, well, it's not a type of phone. The Interphone Study, it was coordinated by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is based in France, but it's an international organization, as you would guess by the name. And there were 13 countries that took part in this study, mostly in Europe, but there was also Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Japan, a lot of studies, they were looking for like industrialized studies or industrialized countries to get the patterns of cell phone use in those areas. And
over the last several days, I can tell you it seems as though the cell phone usage is pretty much exactly the same as it is in the United States. Here in Europe.
What you've seen. Okay.
Everyone has their phone out all the time.
So this study, it said they wanted to try and find a risk, if it exists, between tumors and cell phone use. And so they looked at tumors in young people, 30 to 59 years of age, because they thought those are people that would have had the highest prevalence of cell phone use. They would be the younger people, not an older generation in those areas. And this is called a case control study, meaning they compare people that have had a tumor with control sample that do not, that are from the same demographic statistics. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense.
Okay. So a case control study is observation. It's an observational based study. You're not, having a control group and then doing an experiment to the other group. It's just looking back at the past. So obviously the type of study has a lot of limitations. You can't be sure what factors are are really causing the outcome that you're studying, because there are so many factors that could be at play even when you try and control for things. And you're also relying on people's memories of 10 years ago, how much were you using your cell phone? And, how many hours per day and what sort of things were you doing? Like, I don't remember 2 years ago what I was exactly doing on my phone. It would be really hard to answer, I feel like.
Well, I bet Apple knows exactly what you were doing on your phone 2 years ago. And
they did do some validity studies for this Interphone study where they compared cell phone records to what people reported, in interviews as to doing with their cell phones. And yeah, it's not great, people's memory compared to what they actually did. The people that use their phones a lot tend to overestimate how much they actually do, though. And people that don't use their phones that much tend to underestimate and think they use it less than they really do.
Okay.
So anyways, the point of this type of study is to estimate odds. So they calculate an odds ratio, where if the odds ratio that they find is 1, that would mean that there is no effect of cell phone use, that there is an exactly equal chance of getting a tumor if you used a cell phone or if you never used a cell phone.
Okay, that makes sense.
And if it was greater than 1, there would be a higher chance of developing a tumor if you used a cell phone, and less than 1, there would be a lower chance. Okay?
Okay, yeah.
So they're trying to determine if the radio frequency, the radiation produced by cell phones is carcinogenic. And so they studied specific types of tumors. They didn't want to study every type of tumor because that would be a never-ending study.
Right. There are lots of different types of cancer.
Yeah. So they studied gliomas and meningiomas, which are types of brain tumors.
Okay.
And then they also...
And that makes sense with cell phones, right?
Because you hold it up to your head.
That's what they're thinking the issue is.
Right. And then they also studied acoustic nerve tumors. So acoustic nerve is the nerve coming up to the ear, so you can see how that would also make sense.
Right.
And then parotid gland tumors. So the parotid gland is kind of like a salivary gland, and it's located in the cheek right in front of the ear. So again, that's the same kind of area.
Okay.
Unfortunately, they couldn't get much reliable information for the parotid gland tumors because they're really rare in general, and they were really rare in the study, so there wasn't enough information to compile and get much of an odds ratio. So,
okay. So maybe they didn't need to choose that one.
Yeah, so although they tried to, it didn't really work out. And their information collection for this study was mostly in-person interviews, and then they did some with phone or with paper forms when that wasn't possible. They had a lot of questions about like cell phone use, and then use of other communication devices like pagers, computers, non-cell phone type phones.
What's a pager?
Yeah. And then occupational hazards, like do you work in a field where you would have exposure to different sorts of things that could cause, cancer? Do you...
Like a nuclear plant operator?
Sure. Do you work maybe in a hospital and you work in an OR where they use fluoroscopy and you might be exposed to x-rays a lot?
Okay.
Do you smoke, your family history, all sorts of stuff to try and really eliminate all other factors. Okay.
Because there are other reasons that you can get cancer.
Right, of course. So, results. These were looking at people that had had 10 or more years of regular cell phone use, which is going to be most people in the general population by now, certainly, right?
I don't think I've had a cell phone for 10 years.
When did you get a cell phone? How old were you?
Probably when I was in high school.
Yeah, I got a cell phone when I was 18, when I was a senior in high school. So I've had one for 12 years now. But I certainly didn't used to use it as much as I do now, because it only could make calls.
Kind of phone,
right? Yeah.
Right.
But I also think that as cell phones have progressed, there are in some cases less types of radiation, and in other cases more of other types. So it's so different.
Okay.
So anyways, they found for glioma and meningioma, the brain tumors, that the odds ratio was less than 1. So they would be unlikely that there would be a connection between getting, what did I say it right before? If the odds ratio is greater than 1, that means that there's a likelihood that there's a connection between cell phone use and developing the tumor. If it's at 1, there's like no connection, and if it's less than 1, it should be that like using a cell phone prevents you from getting a tumor.
So is that what they came up with?
So the odds ratio was less than 1 for all deciles. They divided the amount of use people did into deciles, so like a 10% lowest use, then the next 10% of how much they used it, and then the highest percentage. So the highest 10% of people that use their phones the most did have a positive OR odds ratio, but they said that they did not think that data was accurate because there were implausible numbers reported from those people. Like they reported that they were on their cell phones more than it would have been possible to be on them. So they think people were misremembering their cell phone use.
I don't know. Some people use their phone quite a bit.
So yeah, I don't know.
Well, so this sounds like it sounds like what you're saying is that most of the different sections that they tested, they found that there was not a connection.
So in general, they found that they didn't think there was a connection. The only thing they did find is that for people that held their phone on the same side of their head as their tumor was on, there did seem to be a slight connection, but it wasn't super strong.
Oh,
so
okay.
possibly it could be a factor in developing a tumor that's on the same side of head as where you hold your phone.
So no real conclusive data there.
Not super conclusive, and for most people it seems like it was like less than, like it might be helpful. I don't know, or that might just be a funny statistic.
Not conclusive, but on the side of maybe not an issue.
Sure.
It sounds like.
Acoustic nerve tumor, they found the same results, except for they didn't even find a connection with phone use on the same side of the head as the tumor. There was no connection at all.
And that's interesting because that would seem like the most exposed part of your nervous system when
right
you
up
put
there
a
in the
phone
ear.
up to your ear. So that's even outside of the skull for parts of that. So.
Right. So their conclusion for that was that there was possible danger with very high or long-term use, but that they thought it needed further study. They didn't think there was any relation to tumors with moderate use.
Okay.
However, their
I knew there'd be a high
however, their definition of very high use was 30 minutes a day every day for 10 years. So 30 minutes a day, do they mean 30 minutes a day with the phone on your body, 30 minutes a day with the phone in your hand doing something, or 30 minutes a day like talking? Because I probably don't talk on the phone that much, but I do.
There are people that do.
There are people that do.
I see people on the bus every day that talk on the phone the whole bus ride. So.
Oh, well, that's rude. You shouldn't talk on the bus.
People talk on the bus.
I know, but you're not supposed to.
No, well, I don't think there's a rule against that.
So, right. So this definition of very high use, does that really stand true anymore? Is that a definition of high use? Not really, I feel like.
I'm just going to go ahead and say no.
Yeah. So there are some other limitations to this study. The radio, so the type of radiation that the phone puts out is not only limited to the length of the phone call, the length of the time that you're on the phone, but it can also vary by the type of the phone we talked about, by where you were when you made the call, like how close you are to a cell tower, how much the phone is having to work to get a connection, by the type of network you're using, by many factors. So it doesn't time is not really even necessarily the biggest factor in
and especially since
how much radiation the phone is putting out.
This study sounds like it's only talking about using the phone when a lot
as a
of people
phone, right? Yeah,
right. Most of the phone use now is not using it as a phone.
For sure. I only have short conversations for the most part on the phone.
But the phone is still having to communicate with satellites or cell towers or whatever it's, communicating with at the time you're using it.
And I know, I'm carrying my phone in my pocket, but I think it is, checking into cell phone towers, checking my email, doing things like that in the background that probably is having some radiation effects, right?
Right. It seems like the variables between phones too are huge because, as I've learned here on my trip, that the type of cell reception that they use in Europe is different than the type of cell reception than the phones that we have in the U.S.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. I have another study looking at that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That seems to have to do with either the wavelength or the frequency of the wave.
There are so many variables. This is why it's really hard to get a clear answer on this.
Yeah.
So there are a few more limitations of this interphone study is that they questioned the validity of these self-report statistics. People are trying to remember their history, which may not be accurate. You can't make a causal interpretation. It's just, is there a correlation or not? So even if there's a correlation, that doesn't have to be, the cell phone use might not be the factor that's causing it. It could be all these people also had really stressful jobs, and that's why they're on their phone a lot, and this, whatever. I don't know.
Right, yeah.
Also, finally, as we talked about, the users in this study were not, although they were categorized as heavy users, they're not by today's standards necessarily.
They would be light users today.
Right. The median for type use in the study was 2 to 2.5 hours per month on the phone.
Yeah,
it's not
per day.
It's not very much, right? And like I said again, they didn't really look at phone use beside actually talking on the phone.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's not how they're used anymore. Okay.
I want to talk about a couple short things, and then we're going to get into another more complicated study. Okay?
Sounds good.
All right. So one study I looked at was just where people already have a brain tumor. They've already got a tumor. Does continuing to use the phone, like a cell phone, cause the tumor to grow faster or influence the tumor in some way, or does it have no effect?
Okay, that seems like it would lead to at least some type of information on how the phone affects the tumor.
And this was with a 3G phone. This is a more up-to-date phone than the Interphone study.
A little more up-to-date.
A little more. And they found that there was no effect at all that they could see. It didn't affect the tumor growth. So you would think that if it was, I don't know, causing a tumor, it might infect growth, but it didn't seem to.
I guess so. I guess I don't know enough about cancer development to know that if that kind of relationship is expected.
I don't know enough either, I guess. But in this case, there was no connection.
But I would imagine that if these guys are researching that, they think there's at least reason to believe that kind of connection can be made.
Yeah. Now, another thing that the Interphone study brought up is they said if there is a connection between cell phone use and brain tumors, and specifically like glioma, as we mentioned, is a type of brain tumor that they were studying, that you would expect that there would be an increase in cancer rates in the population over the last 20 years or so, since cell phones have become more and more popular and used.
Right. That would make sense.
So I thought I better try and find out about that. Has there been any increased reportings of these type of tumors? And so we have, the best I could find was from 2012. This is from cancer.gov, National Cancer Institute. They had a press release saying U.S. population data shows no increase in brain cancer rates during period of expanding cell phone use. So here's what it sounds. Cell phone use increased substantially from 1992 to 2008, from basically 0 to almost 100% of the population. But the U.S. trends in glioma incidence did not mirror this increase. And they mentioned the Interphone study in this. So they also said that there were projections based on the Interphone study, which they thought maybe if there is a slight connection, like that with that highest decile, that highest percentage group of cell phone users, there might be a small increase in glioma, incidence, but they didn't find that at all in the actual population studies.
Okay.
So it said over the entire study period from 1992 to 2008, glioma incidence patterns were basically constant for all age groups. There was no change.
Huh. Okay.
So I guess one thing you could say is, well, maybe the brain tumors only occur with, long-term use. Maybe it's not an immediate thing, so you wouldn't see spikes for a while yet. But still, that's 1992 to 2008. That is 16 years. That's a long time.
It would seem like it, right? 16 years of exposure to supposedly cancer-causing radiation. You would think that would show up, but... Yeah,
so... Okay, I have one more short thing, and then we're going to go into another long study and then wrap it up.
Okay, so far it seems like the answer is leaning towards no.
Like
so
maybe with high use, but we don't know for sure. Yeah.
I'm excited to hear about the rest of the stuff.
Okay, so I'm not sure if we should leave this part in or not, brother, because I have one study about reproductive concerns, And I didn't really focus the rest of my research on that. Do you think we should go into it? Or?
Reproductive concerns because of cancer?
No. So they looked at damage to testicles in rats with exposure to cell phones. And so they found that this is a study published in February this year, 2016.
Okay.
And they kind of reviewed some previous studies, which basically all were contradictory. Some studies found, yes, there's definitely damage in the tissue. Some studies found no problem at all. They said, well, probably it's because of all these variable types of radiation and various lengths of exposure, right? This was a study that it was small. It only used 12 rats total. And the experimental group was they just put the rat by a phone in talking mode. So it was like on a call to someone, the rat, for 1 hour per day for 45 days.
A rat is having some long conversations.
They're talking a lot. So that would be kind of, that's a lot of talking on the phone. I don't talk on the phone that much for sure.
So the rat is on top of the phone. Is that what you're saying?
The rat is right up next to the phone. And they found no changes, no damage at all. So They were looking, some of the studies that had found damage was in relating to sperm production. And the speculative reason is because the phone is warm and then people are putting it right by their pocket, that it could be affecting like the ability for sperm to be produced effectively at the right temperature.
The temperature, right?
Yeah.
That's weird, though. You know, when you first mentioned it, I was thinking, well, you know, I don't know how most people's pockets are working, but in my pockets...
You're not carrying your phone in a fanny pack, is what you're saying?
When I put my phone in my pocket, it is on my lateral thigh.
Yeah, I know.
Maybe the front of my thigh, but most of the time it is on the side of my thigh, on the outside, so I don't understand. Yeah,
it didn't make a lot of sense to me, unless people have a different sort of pocket situation where they're carrying it right in front. Like like the Scottish kilts, you know, they have those little pouches right in front.
Maybe that's it. Now, of course, radiation doesn't get, you know, depending on the type of radiation, the skin and bones is not going to stop it, so it's still close. Yeah. But
well, and I did find, got away from my mic. I did find some information that was like, there's a what is the right word? Where something is increasing rapidly or decreasing rapidly, exponential. There's an exponential decrease in the amount of radiation as you like go away from something. So even if you're only 3 inches away, that's a huge decrease from when you're right up next to the phone.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know. It might be enough.
Well, I think what we've also discovered here is we have a deficit in our knowledge of how cell phones communicate in radiation.
Yeah, and I'm not a good physicist, so
because that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because the phone is communicating over long distances using some type of wave.
No, but I think that the wave is much stronger as you're really close, and then it gets further from the source. It's not as strong. I don't know.
Hopefully someone can write in with why there's a concentrated amount of radiation around cell phones.
If someone is a physicist or something, we'd be happy to read a listener email to clarify some of this. So I want to provide a little bit more information just to mix things up a little bit more.
Okay, good.
One thing is that the lead investigator for the interphone study, her name is Dr. Elizabeth Cardis. So she was at that International Cancer, what was it called? International Agency for Research on Cancer. But she moved to a different group. It's called IS Global, which is based in Barcelona and is a organization that studies effects of radiation on humans, all sorts of radiation, different types, but that includes phones. And so they have a new research project there called Moby Kids, which is looking at risk of developing cancer after exposure to radiation from cell phones in kids and teens, because she felt that was an area of that they kind of didn't look at much in the interphone study, or at all in the interphone study, and she was feeling like there might be concern with like the developing brain in that age group.
Right. I think that's a wise decision because in most cases, it also seems like they are all in the heavy user
For
category at
sure.
this point. Most kids are, and I would definitely wonder if the developing nervous system, which we know takes quite a long time after you're born to fully develop, has any type of different reaction to the cell
Right.
phones.
So maybe it's not damaging to an adult, but maybe it is to a 12-year-old or something.
Right.
So this is another really large study similar to the Interphone study involving 16 countries. It's got a similar case control design, so it's going to have probably the same flaws in that way, and that it's going to be looking back at people's reported memory and reported usage. So it's the results from that are not available yet, but they should be by the end of this year. So there might be more information to come.
Well, the thing that's a problem with all of this too is that cell phones and the type of technology used with them is already beginning to change completely, with the wearable watches.
Sure.
And the wearable
that are on you all the time. Yeah.
Virtual reality. So I think the areas that there are concentrated radiation are going to change too, because people are probably, I would imagine in the near future, people are not going to be holding phones up to their ears like they do now. They might be
I would agree.
doing it some other way.
Yeah. And so I guess on to that, I think the problem is that scientific research takes a while to do and a while to get published and a while to become public knowledge and then affect how people live their lives. So
the people that sell cell phones need to make money faster than that. So.
And technology changes faster than that. So to that end, the last thing we're going to talk about is a study from the U.S. National Toxicology Program, which is part of the National Institutes of Health. So it's a U.S. national organization. So they published partial findings. So it was not a complete study because they felt that the results were important to get out into the public sooner rather than later.
So I sense some controversy.
Yeah. So it was published late May of this year, so a couple months ago. And it was they said that the rest of their study results from this study that they did the partial release from are going to be due by the end of next year. So they wanted to get this out early. And also this was before a full peer review. So we always like to use peer-reviewed articles when talking about research, because so what that means for people that are not as familiar is that a research team does a study, they write up their paper, and then they send it out to various other experts in the field to read it, to review it, to give feedback, to make sure that the science is valid, that the way that it's been reported is valid, and to give, to see if there's any changes that they think should be done before it's published.
Right. It's like an extreme form of fact-checking.
Right. So the peer review was not complete with this article either. What they did is they released their article and then all of the peer review comments and at the end of it, which was quite a lot. So it was interesting because I read through all of those as well, which you don't normally get to see.
Oh yeah, I bet that was interesting.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about this study. It was a study in rats. Apparently, they also did a similar part of, or another part of the same research in mice, but they didn't release any of the information for mice yet. So I don't know if it was different or why they went ahead with the rats and not the mice. So they exposed the rats to radio frequency radiation at the same frequencies used in U.S. cell phones. So this would not be applicable to the systems in Europe, which was where most of the Interphone study was from.
It seems like the U.S. has a mix of two major types of cell service.
There's GSM and there's CDMA.
Yeah. So the European only has one of those, and I don't know which one it is.
I don't know.
But the U.S. has a combination, so that's what I think.
Okay, so maybe it would be applicable to Europe. So this was
depending on which one they looked at.
They looked at both.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this was a 2-year study, and what they did was they had reverberation chambers to expose the rats to the radio frequency. So they put them in a little room, which is radiation continuous. Which my question was, is that really applicable to how you would be exposed to it if you're carrying it in your pocket or your purse or something, or having it sitting next to you? Or is that like a super higher dosage? I couldn't really tell if that was how that compared.
That is hard to know, but
and
we do know that everyone has phones, and they're all, also there's like all these Wi-Fi devices. So
Wi-Fi networks. Yeah. I mean, I have a phone. My friend sitting next to me has a phone. We're probably all bombarded all the time. So, I mean, one of the reviewers said in their comments, like, I'm not a physicist. I'm not really sure if this is an accurate representation of how cell phones are used or not. I'm hoping that you had physicists look at this.
Right. Yeah, I don't know either.
So they were exposed to either the GSM or the CDMA radio frequency radiation at 900 megahertz. And again, I am not sure how that compares to what we use, but the point of the study was to make it similar to what cell phones are set at.
Okay.
And they did whole body radiation, and they did a variety of exposures. So at either 0 watts per kilogram up to 6 watts per kilogram. And that's for the specific absorption rate. So it's like how much radiation your phone is specifically giving off. And so you can see different phones have different values for that.
Well, that's part of what makes it so hard to do this research, because everyone has different phones.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what is it like for the popular phones? I know a bunch of people have Samsungs and iPhones and
let's see, SAR iPhone. Okay, so here's a website with a variety of phones. So a Motorola Droid Max is 1.54. Where's an iPhone? I'm looking. I don't find it. What's the type of phone? Yeah. I mean, you can look up your phone. Here are some popular phones. Apple iPhone 6 is 1.14. Samsung Galaxy S6, 1.25.
So these numbers that you're reading off are maybe the bigger means the more radiation?
Bigger means more radiation. So this with the rats, they did 0, 1.5, 3, or 6 watts per kilogram. So the 3 and the 6 are way above what is legally allowed and what most cell phones are at. So the 1.5 is closer to where our phones are at.
That makes sense.
Okay, so they did exposure to in these radiation chambers at these various frequencies for all these different groups of rats. They began exposure in utero, so while their mothers were pregnant, and then up to 106 weeks, so 2 years. And then the radio frequency exposures were done for 18 hours a day, and they did a cycle where it'd be 10 minutes on and 10 minutes off. So
does that work out to 18 hours?
No, so it'd be a total exposure time of 9 hours, but they were in the tank doing 10 minutes on, 10 minutes off for 18 hours, 7 days a week.
Okay, gotcha.
So they had some odd results, I'll say.
Okay.
First of all, more of their control group rats, so the rats who were not exposed to anything, a lot of them died early before getting to the end of the study. Like they had 28% survivor rate to the end of the study.
What? So they already had rats that were not healthy?
So then I'm trying to find out, and so they have norms for how long rats live, like in control groups of this particular species of rat. And for a normal group of rats with no experimental variables going on, at the end of 2 years, they have ranges from either 24% survival rate to 76% survival rate with a median or a mean of 48%. So they had quite a lot. It's within the ranges that have been found, but they had quite a lot of rats die in the control group.
Yeah, they were on the higher end.
They were on the very high end.
Or something.
Whereas in their experimental group, the rats receiving the radiation, a lot more of them lived to the end of the study. Even rats that did develop tumors, they still survived.
This is the exact opposite results.
So
maybe it sounds like they mixed up the areas where the rats were.
Yeah, some of the reviewers' comments were like, "We need more information about how you select the control groups because something seems weird." Basically.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so here is what they found. So they did find a low incidence of brain tumors, like gliomas, were observed in all of the rats that were exposed to the GSM radiation. That was only in the male rats, though. Also, in male rats exposed to the CDMA, there was a low incidence of the glioma, exposed only at the highest level, the 6 watts per kilogram, which is not, I don't think, realistic based on what
There doesn't seem like there's any cell phones that do that.
Yeah. Although they didn't get any brain tumors in their control group with the male rats, normally there are a certain number of rats in control groups that will get brain tumors, just in people, there are some people that get brain tumors. And the rates of glioma brain tumors that they found in their control groups, their experimental groups, were not any different than the normal rate. Not statistically, anyways.
Okay.
So
what's the conclusion there? It sounds like
the conclusion is
their control group is all messed up.
Yeah. They think that there might be a significant trend in glioma only with the CDMA exposed rats at the higher levels. However, some of their reviewers disagreed with this. So I don't think it's a super clear connection.
Okay.
With females, they didn't really find any connection with the brain tumors.
So remind me, there was a mild or...
There was perhaps a mild connection with CDMA radiation in male rats. None at all observed in female.
Okay.
The other sort of tumor that they're reporting on in this study was cardiac schwannomas. So cardiac is the heart, right? And schwannoma, a Schwann cell is a type of nerve cell, like a support cell that supports the nervous system. So it was a cell that is part of the nerve system on the heart.
It's not an actual nerve cell, but it's part of the nervous system.
Part of the nervous system, but on the heart. Which I thought was interesting because they're giving these rats whole body radiation, but people aren't really carrying their cell phones like on their heart or holding them up to their heart. So I don't know if this would carry over.
Well, but again, radiation, depending on the type and the intensity, can probably just go right through the body without even noticing,
So they did find, they think, some connection between the cardiac schwannomas and male rats. Again, no connection at all with the female rats. Okay. So it was a stronger connection than with the brain tumors. There was more statistical significance for the cardiac.
And what did the reviewers think about this?
The reviewers did agree that there seemed to be some of a connection between the cardiac schwannomas and the male rats.
Okay, so this is the real results of their study, it sounds like.
Yes. Again, it's kind of on the edge of being statistically significant.
And we're already not really sure because it sounds like their control group was all messed up too.
Yeah, that was a large part of the reviewers' concerns, is that also their control group all died young. If they had survived, perhaps they would have developed a tumor or two just because they lived longer. And then, so one reviewer tried putting in statistics like, okay, what if there had been one more tumor in the control group? And then the results are all completely invalid. Like there's no statistical significance. So
okay,
it's really a bit confusing. The conclusions that they draw is that possibly there's a connection with the brain tumors only in male rats. Again, possibly, but a stronger possibility with the cardiac nerve, the cardiac schwannomas, possibly
right.
in
These
male
all
rats.
Sounds like they were just looking for the right p-value. It doesn't sound like they actually got one with a real strong connection.
I think the thing is, though, if they're saying we do have a connection, why would there be a difference between male and female? Why would male rats be susceptible to a cardiac thing that females would not? It doesn't make a lot of, there are sex hormones. That would be the main difference, right? But why?
I don't know. There are biological differences between male and female.
But are females more resistant to radiation? I've never heard that before. But
yeah, I have no idea.
it seems to be they're suggesting that maybe.
Well, just because of their data, yeah, I would wonder if that has ever been, thought of before. Like maybe the rates of cancer in women is less than it is in men, but
I don't think so.
I've certainly never heard that, and it doesn't make a lot of sense.
So here are some reviewer comments. One reviewer said that they would consider the heart schwannomas to be some evidence of carcinogenic activity, and the malignant gliomas, the brain tumors, would be equivocal evidence of carcinogenic activity, meaning equivocal, like, could go either way, not clear. Yeah.
Okay.
Another person said there might be several caveats relating to the conditions of the study, like how well do these conditions simulate the actual human exposure, like whole body exposure from uteral to old age, because that is old age in rats. Does that compare to what humans are really doing? It's unclear.
Right.
Another person was a bit stronger. I am unable to accept the author's conclusions. We need to know all the other findings of these experiments, given the risks of false positive findings and reporting bias. So they really feel like they didn't like it.
I think I'm on the same page as them.
Another person said, why such low survival of the control group? If they had lived longer and a few tumors occurred, would results still be significant? And one reviewer actually went so far as to, like I said, put the statistics in to be calculated, and they found that they didn't think it was. And then finally, this reviewer says they think there is likely a carcinogenic effect of the radiofrequency exposure for schwannoma in the heart in male rats. They don't think there's any support for carcinogenic effects in the brain. And then in the female rats, there doesn't seem to be any connection at all. Huh. So I think what I would say is, what do you think? I have no idea.
Well, to me, I mean, these are the only studies I've ever heard about on the issue.
There are so many. They're all kind of contradictory like this.
It sounds very unclear.
I thought it was interesting that this study was published early, without the peer review finished, because they felt that it was so important to get the information out there. But I don't feel like their information is strong enough to warrant that based on what I'm reading.
Yeah. I don't understand what information they were trying to get out, because it sounds like the information they got out was that they didn't do a very good study.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. So I work in a hospital. I work with a lot of people with cancer. I have never come across a person with a cardiac schwannoma, and I don't know if that's just a super rare type of cancer that they would only be seen at, I don't know. I've never come across it. I'm just wondering, is it a cancer that occurs in people? Do we not? Like, is it something specific to rats? I've never heard of it before this.
Yeah. Well, what's the history of this particular question? Do cell phones cause cancer? Did it start with the interphone study, or was there something before that brought on?
I think the interphone study is the biggest study, that was one of the biggest first studies looking at it, because of the question that cell phones do emit radiation. We know that some types of radiation do cause damage to people.
Okay, so that's where it came from.
Yeah.
It seems like the real issue with this whole question is not about radiation and causing cancer, because I would imagine that in general we have a lot better information on that and a lot more knowledge, because we already, we know things like, UV rays cause skin cancer and X-rays cause, but it seems to me like with the cell phone technology, it's going to be very, very difficult to do a study that's worth anything, because nobody's using the same device for more than 6 months anymore.
I know, it changes so rapidly. So I just don't know.
Yeah, I think the bigger issue of this question is, for me at least, the more interesting question is, how can we get these technology hardware companies to really figure out what their products are doing to us before they sell them?
I think it would only be strong laws, because there's a market for it. There's a strong market for it. And unless there's clear evidence that it's damaging, I don't know why people would not go for the newest, best technology.
Right.
because it is great technology. I think it probably takes away from some things in our life, but adds a lot too.
It's adding this podcast.
And I don't think it's going anywhere unless there can be clear evidence of strong
Right.
problems. So
I think it's a very interesting question, both the question about cell phones and the larger question about all this technology we use every day without a full understanding of what it's doing to us in more ways than just like radiation. But
yeah. And I think some people I think some people might have some distrust because they feel like it's a big company just trying to make money. What if they're hiding results of that show harm? Like, certainly that's something that has happened in the past in history, right. To different things. So it's not
to sound too conspiracy theory but I mean, I feel like we have heard about issues like that in like nutrition and the food business, where large food companies will pay for study results that are in their favor.
Sure.
That kind of stuff has happened. So
based on the studies that I can find, that I can understand, I don't think there's any clear evidence that cell phones cause cancer right now, but I also can't say that they don't.
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic, especially with the two differing speeds of technology and of research.
So I would say maybe don't sleep with it right next to your head. Maybe don't carry it continuously, always in your pocket, but I also wouldn't stress a ton either at this stage. To be updated if we get more information.
You don't need to carry it in a foil container.
No. Actually, take that back. No medical advice from this show. This is only for your information. Make your own choices.
Kaylin is not recommending anything ever.
No. I will plug it not right next to my head and not carry it in my pocket all the time. If I can stand it. I have to have my phone. But maybe it's good for me.
Probably. Yeah. Maybe. Well, you are a woman, though, so there might be no risk at all.
Well, yeah. So maybe if you're a man and you're trying to have a child, maybe stop carrying it in your pocket. I don't know.
Stop carrying it in your weird pants that put it in
your little fanny pack? I don't know.
Yeah.
All right, brother. Are you ready to wrap up? Sorry, that was a super long one.
Let's wrap it up. It's okay. You're the one editing this one, so that's fine.
Ha! If you enjoyed the episode, please share us with a friend or give us a rating on iTunes.
And as always, if you're interested in sharing anything with us or contacting us, we have a Facebook page.
Yeah. You can also visit our website, placebopodcast.com, for our show notes. I'll put up my links to all the articles. A lot of this is all public, easy to access, especially the interphone study and the last one that I talked about. You can also send us suggestions or feedback on our website.
And thank you to James Aiken for our music.
And thank you to you for listening. We'll be back with a new episode next week, recording in the same location.
Hopefully the sound wasn't too bad on this one.
I hope it's okay. All right. Goodbye.
Bye.